Welcome to Expanding Access, a podcast by Behavioral Health Tech, where we explore the cutting edge of mental health, substance use, and autism and IDD care. Each episode features insightful conversations with industry leaders who are driving real change through technology and innovation. Whether you're a provider, payer, or just passionate about expanding access to behavioral health care, you won't want to miss these stories. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Expanding Access podcast. I'm your host, Solome Tibabu, and we have an amazing guest with us today. Stacy, thank you so much for being here. And we've got a ton to cover. But before we get started, it'd be wonderful if you could just introduce yourself, please. Who are you? What do you do?
Oh my gosh, who am I? That's the big question, right? So I'm the CEO and founder of Consulting for Human Services, and we have been in business about 5 years now. I started this as a clinician in this career of mine and worked my way up through mainly nonprofit behavioral health organizations, all community-based, all Medicaid serving. Did that about 30 years and then pivoted into the consulting space. So been around a long time.
Well, you definitely glossed over so much amazing experience, and I'm familiar with it. It's just remarkable how much you've done and the teams you've led and the size of organizations you've led. And now bringing that expertise to your clients is remarkable. And so would love to dig into that a little bit more. In fact, could you tell our audience, like, what exactly does Consulting for Human Services do? Who do you work with and why now?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think I like to say I got into human services by accident, and then I sort of stayed on purpose. So I started out my first role at a community mental health center in Phoenix, Arizona, doing mobile crisis, suicide prevention, community in-home work, and really fell in love with working with those populations. And so have spent my career starting from there and working up to a couple of COO roles, Chief Strategy Officer of another, VP of Innovation of a third. And my first foundings in mental health really anchored me to wanting to not just honor the mission of organizations, but provide more of, I would say, like the business acumen, which I saw was kind of lacking as you look into the community space. And so it was important for me to have this career that's not only mission-based, but helping to keep nonprofit organizations sustainable. So when I look to start out my team, I think the short answer is that we do management consulting and strategic growth, right? Things like, everything from strategic planning to fractional C-suite to service line analysis and tech selection and optimization and all those things. But really what it is at the core is we help nonprofit leaders keep their business sustainable and thrive in a very ever-changing environment, especially the last few years.
Yes, and many changes there have been. Just out of curiosity, there are a lot of consulting firms, some of the bigger consultancies. Is there any specific reason you would suggest people work with a boutique like yours?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. We get that all the time. And I think in the beginning, it was a little harder to prove ourselves against the big four, the name recognition folks. I would say the big firms bring that name recognition, which is often thought of as equaling a better deliverable. But we really bring that lived experience. So everyone on my team has been through the ranks of an organization, right? They've done the work. It's not academic-based consultancy. It's real-world examples and kind of helping leaders understand what they need to be resilient, to keep their organizations thrived, front of center. But also, I think other than the larger consultants firms, we really have that relationship equity. So we have relationships in the communities with the funders, with the stakeholders, with the state associations, and we have our ear in the ground in a way that I don't think the big organizations can allow their principals and consultants to do. So we have that CFHS edge that I think is our special sauce.
Yes, yeah, your entire team has just really had decades of experience at these behavioral health nonprofits. And today, you're in the boardrooms of some of these very large behavioral health providers. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the top issues that these CEOs are concerned with right now?
Interesting, because it's not what you think, right? I think top of mind, most folks would say it's Medicaid rates or it's the workforce shortage or things like that, the workforce crisis, as we've called it. And it's not really a crisis anymore. It's status quo. This is the land we live in. So those things are important and they're on the minds of leaders. But I think what's top of mind isn't even the rates. We've lived in and through those cycles of ups and downs through different administrations over the past decades. But there's two things. There's one I would say, and it's this uncertainty of the Trump administration. We knew that they were not going to be favorable to behavioral health. Right? We knew that coming in, but I don't think we understood the level of chaos that it would bring and the disruption from so many different angles. We knew there'd be work requirements again, things like that. We knew that there may be some attacks on Medicaid, but never to the scale and scope. And some of those, I would say, gosh, what I think keeps up our team at night is that collateral damage of what's happening in things like immigration and the attacks on that and what that means for the workforce that behavioral health providers employ. So it's not that someone that works for you is undocumented, but their family member certainly could be. And if they're leaving or they're afraid or they're disrupted, then that employee is going to go with them. So some of our states that have a high immigrant population are really seeing some disruption on their workforce. And then, of course, the things like saying that Medicaid dollars can't go to serve anyone who's undocumented. Well, if you're providing CCVHC or FQHC services, you're not asking for citizenship cards at the door. And so some of those things are really disrupting. And then I would say the last piece is really about more of the M&A and the growth strategy. We've seen a lot of high-profile mergers and affiliations announced lately. So there's a lot of discussion around what are folks doing? What are the big players doing? What are those middle players doing? What are the smaller folks doing? Who's combining? Who's thinking of strategy? Who's making a deal? And who's going to be left behind if they don't have a strategy? So those are the top of mind when someone pulls me aside in a conference. It's usually about one of those two things.
And in fact, you were the broker of such many large, high-profile deals, if that's right.
Yeah.
Could share a little more.
Yeah, we've been lucky to be involved in several, some as a matchmaker and some as a strategic advisor. I would say the largest one right now is the Centerstone Brightly merger that's closing in about couple months, and really exciting for the field. Creates the first $1 billion nonprofit provider organization in the history of our work, not just of CFHS, but of our industry. So that's really exciting. Spoiler alert, we have a few more in the pipeline of that size. So stay tuned for maybe a podcast in 6 months or so where we can talk about those. But it isn't just size for size sake, right? And we say that, and it's significant, that deal certainly to the industry. But I think what it represents is the right kind of mission-minded pairing. It's no good to get big for big's sake. What you need to do is that strategic growth, that mission matching, and look for where the alignment is. So we have lots of smaller transactions we're equally as proud of that are going to have an outsized impact in a positive way on the states where they operate. So we're really excited about what's happening in Maine, what's happening in Pennsylvania, some other deals that we're working around the country in other states, New Jersey. Where can I think of others? California, got some things working on there. So we're just seeing a heightened sense of interest in mergers, acquisitions, and affiliations, which I think is great for our industry.
And nonprofit mergers and acquisitions, especially behavioral health, IDD sectors, are notoriously complex. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing as some of the most common pitfalls when it comes to nonprofit M&A?
I think the biggest pitfall that you see on the nonprofit side that's kind of irrelevant on the for-profit side is ego. On the for-profit side, there's this understanding that there's a cycle of the transaction and a sales cycle, and that folks are going to merge and be acquired, and there'll be a leadership shift and what that means to the organization. Sometimes there's a low impact and sometimes there's a high impact. But on the nonprofit side, if you think about, these are mostly legacy organizations that have been around for decades and have never talked about strategic growth, certainly not likely to talk about being acquired. And so I'll give you an example. We hosted recently about 55 CEOs from around the country at our M&A Strategic Expansion Executive Retreat a couple weeks ago here in Philadelphia. And it was really interesting to hear the candid conversation where folks say, look, yeah, I know I'm the steward of this organization and we are in it for the mission and the impact, but I can't help but wonder, what happens to me if I agree to join another organization? The reality is thinking about yourself is not the way to be a good steward for your organization, but it's human nature. So we have to overcome those obstacles in those conversations. That's a big impact. And then the other one is really about the board alignment. You have so many board members in a nonprofit that have been there for decades or are maybe family members or community members, and they're so resistant to change, which also doesn't serve the organization. So I think this is really about investing in those conversations early to make sure that folks understand not just the return on investment of these transactions, but the return on mission.
Great point. Super interesting. And how about from the board perspective? What do you wish every nonprofit board member understood about their role in these kinds of transactions?
The board is so interesting because I think for me, so many of them come for the right reasons. And sometimes they can't see outside of the bubble of what that boardroom looks like, whether it's a quarterly meeting or an annual meeting, depends on the cadence of how that often that occurs, but they're not hearing a lot of outside voices. So it's incredibly important that the CEO takes them on a journey. And the CEO has to be that first point of education about what's happening nationally, what's happening regionally, bringing that information to the board so they understand that staying still can be an expensive option. If you don't choose to grow and the world grows around you, you're going to become like the blockbusters of the world, right? Where you're not really relevant anymore, or you're too small to have scale or impact, or you're losing staff or dollars or any of those things. So I think the biggest mistake I see with boards is that they just don't want to take their head up and look around at what's happening in the world. So really that's the CEO's role to me, is making sure they get in front of that and they're prepping the board for these kinds of conversations. That it's a very slow roll sometimes to starting to talk about the idea to getting folks to really talk about what that would look like.
And these kinds of things it's just a lot of disruption. And I know disruption is something you talk quite a bit about, and
Yeah.
you speak very often. And this is a topic you cover a lot. It'd be great to hear what advice you have for leaders when leading in constant disruption.
Life isn't linear, right? And so disruption is something that we're naturally going to see in our own lives. And it's certainly the life cycle of an organization. But I think the key there is to not be afraid of it and wince, is to look for the opportunity there. Just like folks did even through COVID, there's so many examples of that was just the most incredible disruption that we've probably had in our lifetime, right? And then thinking about who really benefited from thinking about their service models in new ways, like whether it's telehealth or something that really changed the way we deliver care, to thinking about how to reach folks in their community, how to do things differently, how to leverage different expertise. I mean, disruption, it's not the storm to wait out. I like to tell my clients, it's something that you have to dive into and figure out how to navigate your ship differently. You can't kind of bunker down and just say, we're not going to deal with this. I think the organizations that really are the most resilient are the ones that are fast and flexible, and they're not afraid of change. Those successful leaders are the ones who are not risk averse, and they can say, yeah, this is what's thrown at us today, but we're going to stick to our strategic vision, and we're going to figure out to work around the bumps, right? You keep your eye on that goal, that GPS, where you're headed. You may have a few detours, but you're still going to get there if you're tenacious and you're really leading your teams with that optimism to kind of embrace that change.
You talked about a lot of these nonprofit organizations as legacy orgs, been around forever. What about the approach to developing leadership in the next generations?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's coming fast and furious for so many of us, right? As we age as leaders, I think about that all the time, even in my own small company, of what's the next iteration look like. I'm not going to be in this role forever, hopefully. There's another person there. But certainly in organizations, this is not a sexy profession for young people. We don't see a lot of 20-somethings coming out of grad school and saying, I can't wait to be a nonprofit leader. So we have to do a little bit more, I think, to engage and think about how do we raise that next generation of leaderships? And it's not just succession planning for a future, it's really your present strategy too. It's thinking about young leaders aren't looking for hierarchy like folks did maybe 20, 30 years ago. They're looking for impact. And if you don't attract them in a way that makes it appealing to them for the work they're going to do, this isn't always the highest paying end of the spectrum either. So there's a lot of things running against us in the nonprofit world, especially. But I think the best organizations are ones that are really pairing emerging leaders with seasoned executives early, getting them engaged in that mentorship process, right? Letting them in the rooms early to see that kind of impact, to teach executive presence. This is a virtual world, and my whole team is virtual. Many of my client teams are virtual, and it's really hard for young people to learn executive presence and problem-solving skills. And those executive level interactions and even things like conflict resolution virtually, because you're not sitting with someone watching them do it. So there's a more intentionality that has to happen around getting those leaders engaged and letting them see what that path could be for them. And I don't think we do enough of that in the nonprofit space. And I think we could do more with interns as well. And I don't really see that happening from the leadership standpoint either.
Yeah, I know something I've heard you say before is the strongest organizations that you've seen aren't just scaling services, they're scaling leadership. And I've always remembered that.
Yeah.
What a great use case here. And of course, I'm going to sound like an old fogey, but we're talking about the next generations and how about technology? Where do you
Yeah.
see
Oh my
technology play a
gosh.
role with a lot of these providers?
I have to practice what I preach a little bit more, but I try to also go to that place of this is not something you can force on someone who's not comfortable with it, right? So I always go into the tech end kicking and screaming a little bit when there's a new app or the team wants to try something new. It was Slack and Asana and all those things. And I thought, can't we just have a pad and pen like we used to? But we can't, right? But I'm also not the one to lead those initiatives. So the most senior person shouldn't be leading your technology. It should be the one who's most interested in the technology. So, I mean, I can be convinced, I can get a cheat sheet and the staff can help me get there to whatever it is that they want to try in the AI and tech world. And I'll eventually begrudgingly get there, but I'm not the one that's excited about it from the beginning. So you've got to let your team sort of bubble up and to volunteer into those roles, especially on the technology side. To me, the most innovative providers aren't using it as sort of the bright, shiny. They're using it to save time, kind of to reduce friction and process, starting with that low-hanging fruit and the easy win. But the other thing to think about is it's not free. And if you are a nonprofit and you're earning a 1% margin, there isn't a lot of disposable income there to play around with tech toys. And so that's kind of another reason to think about scale. But on the very most basic level, I think that what I see for organizations that do it well is they weave that technology into every department. It's not a separate silo. You know what I mean? It's not like, here's the tech people and the rest of the organization is functioning. It's here's this thread of technology and how it's woven into HR, how it's woven into clinical, how it's woven into finance and revenue cycle and ops. And then maybe there's somebody who's accountable for that through the org, but it's not like the guy over there in the IT room like we used to have years ago. We've got to think about this in a new way, in a new philosophy. So it's exciting, but I also recognize that it's intimidating for people as well.
Yes, a lot moving fast, and I can relate to a lot of that as well. I probably have who knows how many AI apps right now on this session, but I still have my Post-it notes here with my notes. So,
I mean, the paper and pen never fails you.
It really doesn't.
But we couldn't be having this conversation without it, though. So I think that's the beauty of it. We have to start somewhere. That's right.
Exactly. Great takeaway. So, Stacy, I'm afraid to ask what number you're up to in terms of conferences this year, but I know you're a frequent speaker on the road. I think between us, we're like 200 last year, something totally asinine. But of course, you're hearing and sharing trends. What would you say behavioral health and human service providers, executives who are listening in, what kind of trends should they be paying attention to that aren't quite so obvious?
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I think maybe we should just next year think about renting a place and we can share it. You're only there half a year and I'm only there half a year. So it might work. It's true. But I love going to those events. I love seeing different groups within our sector. I love being in different regions and different states and hearing what people are excited about. I think the smartest executives that I can surround myself with are not just watching our sector. They're watching what's happening at the edges of it. And I think what I mean by that is whole person care and those things on the medical space that are interesting to see in behavioral health, the AI and the tech-enabled care, of course, but some really interesting conversations about like GLP-1s. What does that mean for the health of our and the well-being of our staff? What does that mean for the people we support? There's linked to things like body image and weight and depression. And how will that impact behavioral health? And so we're starting to see more ties to that and pay more attention to that, which I think is interesting. There's always the conversations about value-based payments. And I'm probably always the one who is never so eager on that in our space. I think especially in the nonprofit world, when you're talking about pure behavioral health, especially if you're talking about IDD, it's such a small percentage. I don't see that scaling in my lifetime. I hope I'm wrong about that one, but it's something folks talk about, but it's polarizing, right? And so There's a lot of unknowns when you talk about value-based care. So I think that's something that'll stick around, but it's not something that I think is a trend or it's high on the conversation list with folks in my circles, at least. I think those ripples always reach us, but I think the leaders who notice what's happening in those adjacent spaces are the ones that can really impact their organizations in the most positive way. I think the biggest danger to us in our sector is this is the way we've always done it conversation. That's a recipe for disaster, especially in 2025 when things are changing so quickly. It's hard to really lock in and say, I'm not going to change, because I think you'll be out of business sooner than that.
Absolutely. Many, especially nonprofit behavioral health providers, they have to do something. And there's been so much change lately. And so there's so many questions I always want to ask you. You're just a wealth of knowledge. But if I could ask one more, I'm just thinking for the providers in the audience listening in, some will be walking away wondering if it's seriously time for them to consider M&A. Maybe they have somebody in mind already. What advice would you give for the next few steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does feel overwhelming. And folks often say, I don't even want to talk about this because I don't know where to start. So I think the start is tell your own story to yourself and someone you feel most close to in your organization, whether that's a staff person or an advisor. But what's the case for why you want to grow? Really understand that story. It's not just about getting bigger and having a kingdom, so to speak. It's because you want to serve whom, because you want to serve them where, because you want to serve them why. And when you think about your own mission statement and your own strategic plan and your values and your vision as an organization, the story really is, how does merger, acquisition, or affiliation accomplish what you want to accomplish in your strategic plan more quickly, more efficiently, and more affordably? And if you can tell that story to your board and start there, that's always where I say is step one. It doesn't have to be to find a partner or the how, but I like just being really anchored in the why and what that would look like for you. In the magic wand best case scenario, your organization looks like X in 2 or 3 years. And does X get there faster by doing some kind of a growth strategy? And if you can definitively say yes, that's the first next step, right? You don't have to dive into partners and you don't have to dive into this legal structure of what it looks like. Just tell your story and get really comfortable and passionate about why. And I think that leads itself into the easy next progression.
Really excellent advice. And of course, another step is called Consulting for Human Services. So where can folks learn more?
Yeah, we really have become the champions for nonprofit sustainability through M&A. And that's happened organically over the last few years. It's not what we started out to do, but certainly you can reach us at consultingfhs.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I always post things. I love folks to interact, ask questions, but this is not slowing down. We're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube on this. We're going to see more consolidations. We're going to see more mergers and affiliations over the next few years. And I think the smart leaders are the ones who are getting in front of it and deciding their own destiny.
That's just excellent advice. Well, thank you so much, Stacy. That's excellent advice. Really appreciate any opportunity to talk with you and learn from you. So thank you for joining us on Expanding Access today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Expanding Access. We hope you're feeling inspired by today's discussion. If you've enjoyed the episode, subscribe and share it with your network. For more content and opportunities to get involved in transforming care, visit behavioralhealthtech.com. Until next time, let's keep pushing boundaries and expanding access together.